In this video, we are going to complete our M07L02 lab. This is going to be adding in our delete, and we'll also take a look at the tap gesture as well. If we go to our XAML for a customer list, we should notice that we have two different areas. We have essentially our swipe view. We're going to hold off on that, do that last. First, we're going to go ahead and we're going to deal with our context flyout. This is our base. This is going to provide us the context menu option. And if we would go ahead and try this out right now, so if we go ahead and launch this, do a left mouse click, we can see that we have our delete option there. We have our image as well, that's our trash can. But if we click it, it doesn't do anything whatsoever, and we need to change that behavior. We're going to come down and to our menu flyout item where we see the text equals delete. We're going to go to the next line and add our clicked event and set this equal to on delete clicked. If we go ahead and highlight it, hit the F12, this is going to generate our code behind for this method. And what we really want to do here is when we have that clicked, we want to go ahead and get that sender, and that sender is essentially going to be a menu flyout item. So in this case, we can go ahead and do if sender is menu flyout item. We're just going to call this item here. Then we want to check to see if our item.binding context, so if we look at this, if item dot, we can see that we have a binding context in here. If we take that, we can check to see if that is a customer. If it is an instance of a customer, then we can go ahead and do our removing of this from our list. This is essentially going to be our customer list. That's essentially our customer list class. We have the remove method that we can execute, and we just are going to pass in our instance of the customer and remove it from the list. And that's all it really takes. Now, if we wanted to do something, and we'll take a look at that in just a second, it's a little bit more clunky to do it using a tap gesture and then the mouse click, but we can take a look at what that looks like as well. We're going to go ahead and rerun our application here with this change. And if we go ahead and do a right mouse click on Don and delete, he's gone. Sarah, gone. Karen, gone. Nick, gone. Phil, gone. So essentially what we're doing is we are calling that customer list and executing that remove method, which also then raises that event that something in that list has changed. Then that's wired to our update UI. That update UI is essentially going to go out and get a copy of the list and replace what it currently has as far as the list, and then reshow that in the user interface. Now, how can we do this just a little bit different using the tap gesture? So let's go ahead and let's look at that. This is not the ideal way to handle this, but it gets into, we can use something else within our customer list class that we generated. And we want to create here a tap gesture recognizer. So when they tap on something, we want to have some type of an action take place. Typically, we would do this if we were trying to drill into a detail view of some data, and we're not necessarily going to take it to that, but they would tap on the item to select it, and then it would move to the next screen. But in our case, we're not moving really to the next screen. We're just using a pop-up when we're dealing with adding information, but we can look at the tapped. So this is on the tapped gesture recognizer. So if we put in tapped here, and this is going to be the on customer tapped, let's go ahead and generate the code behind for that. Switching to our code behind, in the case of when a customer is tapped on, we want to essentially get that customer record. And then from that customer record, we want to determine an index location so that we can use our indexer that we created within our customer list class to do the selection to remove it from the list. Far-fetched, again, typically we would use onCustomerTap to take the information for that customer and drill into a detail. We would essentially have our customer, then we could just pass that through to our pop-up and show it. But in this case, we're trying to use our indexer. We don't have a view for our records after we add them other than in the list view, which is our collection view. So we're just going to go ahead and try to use that for deletion purposes. So before we get started, let's scroll up. We're going to add a property, and this property is essentially going to be just a normal property. We're not going to be using it in the user interface. This is just going to be handled from the code behind, and we're just going to use the short form of this. It's going to be an integer value, and we're going to make this selected customer. We're going to make the initial starting value for our initial customer for that selected customer be -1. So that selected customer is going to have a value of -1. Then we're going to come down to our onCustomer tapped, and for our onCustomer tap, we essentially have a border. And if we go back to our customer list view, we can see that our tap gesture recognizer is within our border. So when we are getting our sender back, it's essentially going to be a border. So if the sender is border, and essentially if it is, then we're going to be defining a variable item that's of type border. Once we have that item, then we can go ahead and check to see if the item.binding context, again, we're using that binding context, checking to see if it is a customer, and if it is, then assign it to the customer variable that we can use. And in our case, we want to set our selected customer, this is going to be our index, equal to, and we're just going to find it in our list. We have our property here, that's our customers. That's an observable list. We'll just find the index of that. Within here, this is going to be customer lowercase, and we're going to be looking for the index of. That's going to give us the location within the list. Passing in our customer, if it can't find it in the list, it's going to return a -1. So we're going to pass in the customer that we just pulled out, and then we're going to go ahead and have that set. And when it's set, then we're going to go up to our onDelete clicked, and instead of doing this, we're going to comment this out. We're going to go ahead and check to see if our selected index is greater than -1, because if it's not, then nothing has been made as far as the change. Let's make this customer, I think. Customer instead of index. So we have essentially the location. We want to get our customer. So this is going to be, we're going to create a new instance of our customer, call it cust, and we're going to use our customer list, that indexer that we set up, selected customer, and that's essentially going to return the customer instance to us using that indexer we defined. Once we have our customer record, then we can go ahead and do a customer list .remove. That's going to then go ahead and do the same thing where it essentially removes it from the list that's in that customer list class. And then we're going to then notify our user interface to make the change. Now, if we run this, it's going to be a lot more clunky. If I go ahead and I do a right mouse click and delete, notice it's not doing anything. I have to actually tap on it to select it. And then if I go ahead and do a right mouse click and delete, then it's going to remove that particular record. So I would have to tap on it, then do the right mouse click. That's not really how we would like to process it, but this is just taking things to the nth degree so that you can see that when we tap on the actual row, typically if we tapped on it, then we would go to a details page, and we would look and see the details for that particular customer. But we are not implementing that. So that is how we can implement something with the tapped. Probably going to comment this block out because that's not very user friendly, and I'm going to uncomment this block and restore it to the original logic there. This is just a demonstration on how we can get that tap gesture. Now the last thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and implement our swipe. And a swipe is only going to work if we have a touch screen, and my laptop is touchscreen, but I'm connected to 2 monitors, and I'm not really close to my laptop when I'm trying to run the application, so it's not going to work. So we're going to have to show this when we actually implement it in our Android emulator, and then we'll be able to do more of swiping in order to change out things here. So let's go ahead and let's start this by adding on our swiped item a clicked event. So we're going to come here on the swiped item, and where we have the background, we're just going to add the clicked on the swipe item, set it equal to on swipe delete clicked. Now, why am I not using our delete method already? Because it's going to have a different type of thing that we're getting back from that sender. We're going to go ahead and keep it simple. We could potentially use the same method, but then we would have to do a lot of checking to see if it's this kind of thing before we did anything, or this kind of thing, or this kind of thing. And we're just going to keep it simple. So we're going to add another code behind method block. We're going to generate it. And this time with our swipe, it's essentially going to be very similar to what we did with our on delete clicked. We're essentially going to check to see if the sender is a swipe item. And if it is, we're going to assign it to item. And then once in here, if the item binding context is a customer, then we can go ahead and just do that customer list dot remove and pass in that customer instance. Go ahead and save that. This time we're going to try to run it in Android. I'm going to pick the latest one. I have Pixel 7 here, and this might take a little bit of time here. Now we see our selections, and if we try to swipe, so if we just kind of, if we get the arrows, that's not a good thing. So if we just kind of swipe, or doing anything, there it goes. Then if we go ahead and swipe, we can delete, and then swipe. Nope, got the arrows. Don't want to do that. Swipe, delete, swipe. Oops, got the arrows. Those arrows are annoying. Then we can delete. Maybe we need to be over more and not as close to the edge there. And then we can delete. So that essentially is using our swipe view. Unfortunately, as I indicated, you would need to have some type of a tablet. You would need to have a touch screen, or you would need to have a phone device in order to do that. It's not going to, by default, work on Windows unless you have a touch screen, or on a Mac as well without a touch screen. So this is the walkthrough. Go ahead and zip up your code and submit it for grading.